All right, so been through the herbicides, and I want to talk a little bit about why we control weeds. Obviously, there's a lot of competition in the pasture if you just have a pile of weeds out there, right? So not only do we want to decrease competition, but we also want to increase forage quality. We want to protect our animals from poisonous plants, increase our grazing areas, and then also, Alex talked about the invasive species, environmental protection. Get our invasives out, get our natives back in. So one of the things we talk about competition a lot, but a lot of times we leave out what I call grazing interference. All right? So this weed up here is called Mexican prickly poppy. We have Natal's thistle, and then tropical soda apple. What do all three of these species have in common? They got thorns. Now, would you like to stick your head down in there and try to graze some grass right underneath those, or right next to them? Usually not. So a lot of times what you see is, a lot of grazing outside of the plants. When you get up next to the plant, there'll be grass that the animals haven't grazed. So grazing interference, not only does it decrease the amount of forage being produced, but it's also limiting the amount of forage that the animals are consuming. Okay, so if you look out across a pasture like this, you see the animals have actually grazed around and haven't really touched very much. Or you'll see tall grass here, you see a lot of close grazing here. Well, some people might say, well, that's just because as this is regrowing, it's more tender, it's got more nutrient value, the cows are preferentially grazing that. But I challenge you to go out and look a little bit closer. See if this will work. So what we found in that pasture is this little legume called milkweed. And there's some evidence, but not conclusive, that this little legume might be poisonous. So the cattle were actually grazing around this plant out in that pasture. Okay? So if you look a little bit closer, you can see this legume's growing right through here, over in here, over in here, where this grass is taller, and they're grazing where that legume isn't present. So even though that plant didn't have spines and thorns, it's keeping the cattle from grazing. And this next two slides are just showing basically the usability of a pasture by treating it. So this was some work that was done in Missouri after I left there. And what these yellow dots and blue dots represent is when a cow grazed, a little GPS collar on their neck recorded when their head dropped to the ground. Okay? So they monitored that for about 3 weeks, and this is the distribution they got, pretty even across both sides of the pastures. So they came in, treated this half of the pasture with herbicide, left this half untreated. Go the right way. All right, so what they saw 4 months after treatment is the cows really concentrated on the pasture, and half of the pasture that was treated with herbicide. Oh my gosh. All the weeds were gone on the left versus over here where they had to trounce around and try to graze at different spaces where the weeds were present. Okay. Any questions so far? You guys are being too quiet. All right. Okay, establishment. What do we do to keep our weeds out during establishment, right? We spent $600 to $800 an acre to get something established. That's probably even low. So what can we do to help get our forage going? Well, for Bahia grass, there really isn't much. Until the Bahia grass gets 5 inches tall and has about 3 tillers, or you see rhizomes, you dig it up and see rhizomes forming, then you can do something. But since the Bahia grass seed doesn't all germinate at once, if you treat just because you go out and see a couple plants or 5 inches tall, you still might reduce the amount of establishment that you could get. So generally we recommend mowing for Bahia grass during the first year of establishment. For Bermuda grass and star grass, you have 2 options. Within 7 to 10 days after planting, it would be 2 pints of 2,4-D or 2 pints of weed master. For limpo grass or Hermothria or Floralta, whatever you want to call that one, Banville to pint and a half per acre is the only option at 7 to 10 days after planting as well. Okay, how many of you have planted something and tried to go out in 7 to 10 days and be flooded and not be able to get out in the pasture? I've seen a few hands go up. All right, so can we do anything at that point? And the research we did a few years ago is yes, we can. Talked about outrider earlier. The actual spectrum of the use rate is 1 to 2 ounces. Normally recommend 1 to 1 1/3. I usually err on the 1 ounce side because I don't think you get that much more out of that extra 1/3 of an ounce. So instead of spending $16 an acre, you're spending around 12 to 13. Okay? So if you miss that 7 to 10 day window, for Bermuda grass, star grass, and limpo grass, it can be applied as early as 28 days after planting. Okay? But not for Bahia grass. For established pastures, which would include Bahia grass, that's when you can apply it to all of them. All right, so just to reiterate, apparently have 2 slides.
Ban will not work after 10 days?
Will ban will not work after 10 days? If the sedges have already emerged and you can see green, it's not going to work on those plants that have emerged. Will you reduce the population? Some, probably, but not by much. Because they usually germinate pretty rapidly. So if you miss that 7 to 10 day window, I just recommend you wait 28 days, and then you can put the outrider out. And then if you do have some broadleaf weeds, because outrider isn't very good on broadleaf weeds, you can add 2,4-D or weed master to it, or in the case of limpo grass, Banville, dicamba. Good question. All right, so sedges or water grass, limpo grass, Bermuda grass, star grass, 1 to 1 1/3 ounces, 28 days, and Bahia grass only the year after establishment, again at the same rate. All right, what about forage tolerance? Well, Bahia grass really, in my mind, is probably the most tolerant to the herbicides that we use, but it is sensitive to metsulfuron, especially Pensacola. And metsulfuron is also in chaparral and pasture. It's also sensitive to imazapic, which is in pose or panoramic. But we do use imazapic at low rates along the roadsides to actually suppress the Bahia grass growth, to decrease the number of mowings it takes throughout the year. Bermuda grass and star grass is fairly tolerant to everything that we have, but you can get some injury, especially from products containing triclopyr, so Remedy Ultra, Pasture Guard, especially under high temperature, high relative humidity. Limpo grass is can be sensitive, and it can depend on the time of year. If you look at especially table 1 and weed management and limpo grass, which is on page 43. I want to make sure I tell you right. I better flip there too. what you'll notice in that table is that almost all the herbicides that are listed, I have listed as being safe from January to April and November to December. But if you look from May to October, you'll see that 2,4-D, Clean Wave, Grazing Next, Remedy, and Weedmaster shouldn't be applied. So it's our thinking that limpet grass is more sensitive during the warm, humid environment of the summer growing season, but not so much during the cooler months. So we normally say Thanksgiving to Tax Day, you can spray almost everything you want to on limpet grass with minimal injury. All right, so currently I have a student sitting over here in the corner in the blue shirt named Cody. I tell him to stand up, but it's all right. Can't see him anyway. This is some of the work that he did last summer, and this is only 1 year of data right now. We're repeating this right now. But we did this work during the summer growing season, looking at the different herbicides we have available. So this is dry matter. We can say this is pounds per acre for right now. This is dicamba, which is our standard of 1.5 pints per acre. 2,4-D at 4 pints per acre. Weedmaster at 3 pints per acre. Grazing Next at 24 ounces. And that's sulfuron. Pasture Guard. Rejuvra, which is the new Chaparral. So this is aminopyrrolid plus metsulfuron. 2 rates of Velpar, 1 quart rate and 2 quart rate, and then this is aminocyclopyrrochlor at the end. All right, so what we did in this study is we went out and clipped off plants at different stages and came back and treated those plants how many days after? 2 weeks? Yeah, 2 weeks after we staged the limbo grass. And what we found was there was no impact on regrowth height, so we averaged actually everything over all the different heights we had, which really surprised us. I expected to see more injury on limbo grass that was regrowing from being cut pretty short, but that's not what we were seeing. But what we did see is about a 20% decrease from 2,4-D. Jeez. See if we can hold this thing without advancing. There we go. 20% with 2,4-D. And then 40 to about 65-70% with Velpar. Okay. This one bothers me quite a bit because, as we'll get into later, this is our only product we have for smut grass control. So if you have a bunch of smut grass in limbo grass pastures, I really don't have many good answers for you unless you're willing to accept a lot of injury. Okay. Now we also looked at fertility time. So we fertilized 2 weeks before, the day of, and then 2 weeks after herbicide application. And again, similar like our regrowth height study, fertility timing had no impact on our treatments whatsoever. So we averaged over all those timings. And our standard here produced about 7,500 pounds per acre. Metsulfuron by itself had no negative impacts whatsoever. Chaparral by itself had no negative impacts whatsoever. But we did see some decreases with 2,4-D, Weedmaster, Grazing Next, Pasture Guard, and again with the Velpar treatments. But I don't think nearly as bad at the 1 quart rate when we have some fertility in that pasture. So a little bit of promise there, but still, looking at a 20 to 30, maybe sometimes 40% reduction in limbo grass biomass when Velpar is applied.